Describe your educational experiences.
Some of my educational experiences growing up, they're quite varied. I actually began in an oral program. This program was very a strict oral approach. I had auditory training, speech training, really wasn't involved much with communicating and writing. It was mostly speech and auditory training. And I must comment that the speech training that I had all my life, it was 1 to 2 hours a week. I would go over the same vowels and consonants over and over again. This was their approach. And with auditory training, I was had to train with practicing hearing sounds. And at this one particular school I'm talking about now, there were 10 to 20 of us who all went through the same approach, practicing speech, reading, and hearing, and not much about education, how do you say ball, instead of more information and understanding the information around the topic. Another school that I was at, I was the only deaf student among all hearing students, and I had a hard of hearing specialist who would come once or twice a week, and they would work with me on speech training. They would also come to my classroom and meet with my teachers twice a week to make sure that I was provided materials, etc. And that was when I was the only deaf student, and I'll tell you, I really, in socializing and being around other people, I had to develop advocacy skills very young, and I never really felt connected with my peers. I knew that I was different than them, yes, but being pulled out of class, and other students obviously knew that something was wrong. Where is she going? And having to go 2 hours a week, and I knew that they looked at me as someone that was different. And my identity was very difficult. Now, by the time I got to high school, the first high school I went to, there were several other deaf students, but we were all separated in different classes. We weren't in the same class. And I had that same experience of more emphasis on my speech training than on my education and my learning. Until finally my senior year in high school, I went to a deaf program. There were more than 20 deaf students that I actually was able to socialize with, and I admit I spent more time with those deaf students than I did all of my hearing peers, because I didn't have to explain what I needed. You need to look at me, and I didn't miss out all of that information that I felt I did with hearing students. And it's unintentional on their part. I always felt like they were all talking together, and I had to really work hard at understanding. So with all deaf students in those classes, it was much better. I could really understand what was going on. When I went to college, I decided to move away from home. In the college that I attended, there were 100 deaf students with about 30,000 hearing students. So it was very nice. They had some classes that were all deaf classes. So, for example, I might have 3 hearing classes and then maybe 2 classes that had all deaf students with a signing teacher. That teacher could match communication with an oral person, a hard of hearing person, or a deaf person. There was captioning or signing in the classroom. So even if that teacher wasn't as skilled in signing, I could look at the captions for something that I missed. And I remember thinking, I wished I had all of my classes captioned or signed like this. And I did go to Gallaudet University for 1 year, and it was awesome. Everything was accessible, from my social life and friends to teachers, staff, going in the financial aid office, in the dorm. Everything was accessible there, and it was really awesome. I, at the same time, feel that I can switch back and forth from the hearing to deaf world, and I've had to have more skill in knowing to advocate for myself with the hearing world.